Hello, hello. It's so great to be here. I'm honored to have an audience with you all and to have this conversation with you, Denise.
No problem, no problem. And so, for those of you today, our topic is really around um, the evolution of white allyship. So, we picked this topic because there's been a lot of quiet rumblings about diversity fatigue, some of them a little louder than others, but also as we've seen what feels like the world not being welcoming and more divisive, that it's time for us to talk about what the next step is, to look back and see what we've done that may not have been as successful as we want, but also plan our next steps as allies, not just allies, but partners in this effort to improve diversity, equity, inclusion, and particularly belonging, and to ensure that everybody belongs, feels that they belong, and has the psychological safety necessary to contribute at their highest level. This conversation, the next step, the evolution of white allyship, is particularly designed to help those who have been learning how to be an ally and have been practicing for a while and want to know what do I do next? As well as we're going to touch on some really tough questions that talk about some of the things that we've heard that may be keeping people hesitant to step forward. So, Deidre, would you like to open with some comments?
Actually, I would. So I am a professional provocateur in that I get called and asked to ruffle feathers, to say things that others won't say, and to call out and challenge people on things or narratives that they have accepted as fact, right? And part of that is my work in the DEI space. I always start off with the statement that my very first DEI manual has a floppy disk in the back of it. So I am not new to DEI. I did not join the DEI march when it was sexy and when it was the thing to do and when everybody got all excited and like, oh, we need to be doing something. And then we had these flood of people that begin to care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I am old DEI in that I really have studied, I teach, I'm a professor, and I teach how we change DEI at a very systemic level, right? And what I often tell people is this modern age of interest in DEI puts DEI as an input. And the reason everyone's fatigued is because they put DEI as an input when DEI is really an outcome. And they've gotten them convoluted. And so many people are frustrated and have DEI fatigue because they've seen no results.
Mm-hmm.
They don't see results because they didn't actually put it in properly. They put in DEI and didn't expect an output of DEI. And so what we have is people have learned all this stuff. They've gone to unconscious bias training. They've done this training. They've read the book on being an ally. And that simply was never enough. But those people who everyone sought after as leaders of the movement, who were never leaders or properly educated in the movement, put that out there as a catchphrase. It was a nice, sexy word. We want allies. And now that the allyship is starting to shift, that allyship hasn't evolved to what it always needed to be in the first place, right? And so that's why I love having this conversation. That's why I love engaging in this. This is why I love when we sit down and have these real conversations about what's really at hand and not the pretty dressing of what we think is at hand.
That follows as a bit of a question, or gens a question up for me. So you say that we taught a small piece, but never helped people get over the hard part of it. When you say that, describe what some of the outcomes have been from what most people have been taught.
That's the problem. We haven't had outcomes. That's why we have DEI fatigue, because people aren't really saying, I'm tired of hearing about DEI. What they're saying is, I'm tired of not having results. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. That the question you asked is perfect. We haven't seen outcomes. And even when we use the term allyship, I tell people allies are conveniently friends until they're enemies. Like when we think about international relations, Countries have allies all the time, and those allies quickly turn into enemies when it's no longer convenient for the relationship. And so allyship is a relationship of convenience and personal benefit. It's only important that we mutually benefit because I need you right now.
Mm-hmm.
I always throw out a question to make this very, very real for us. Everybody that's here, there's only a few of us here, but type in the chat for me, when did women get the right to vote? Just really quickly, type in the chat for me. When did women get the right to vote? You know what? I'll even allow you to cheat. If you don't know it right off the top of your head, you can Google it, and I think that's fair game. Someone said 1945.
Or use Chat GPT, right?
Chat GPT, 1935. David said 1935. I see those two. Now, if you Google it, who Googled it? Like, it's okay to say I Googled it. It's okay to say I Googled it. Now, if you go and Google, when did women get the right to vote? Someone do it really quickly and takes 2 seconds. Tell me what answer comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Banter, banter, banter.
Well, it was passed in 2019 through the Senate, but in 2020 it
You mean
became
19?
a law.
19.
1919.
I'm like, oh no, not 2000. We've been doing something wrong. Right. So David got us there, right? If you put it in Google, it'll tell you 19, it was ratified, and 1920 was when women got the right to vote. Part of what we have to do with allyship, and even as we look at DEI as a whole, we have to, and this goes in my model, my DARE model that I use about how to have these conversations, that R stands for reviewing the narratives that we have accepted as fact. And many of these narratives are codified in how we teach history. So history, Google will tell you that women got the right to vote in 1920. That is grossly inaccurate. And by grossly, I mean 45 years inaccurate. Mm-hmm. Black women could not vote until 1965. So how can history, if we talk about allyship and our importance, because as an ally, as a woman, I did not get the right to vote until all women could vote. But the narrative that we have accepted as fact and stand on is that women got the right to vote in 1920, so much so that if you put it in Google, if you read a history book that our children are taught, any history teacher, even women's history professors will tell you that women got the right to vote in 1920. Because we all marched. I'm a member of a very, very proud member of an organization, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, that was very instrumental in the women's suffrage movement and getting women the right to vote. And when women got the right to vote in 1920, everything stopped. None of those women who were allies when it was convenient said, hey, everyone that helped this get passed does not have the right to vote, so we're not done. That is what allyship looks like. And that's the thing that we're continuing to this day. It's okay for us to be partners until I get what I need to get done. And now the work is done. Mm-hmm. And the reality is allyship isn't enough, because allyship says when the work is done for me, the work gets to stop. And we have seen historically, and unfortunately, 1920 wasn't the first time it happened. We've seen historically where allyship doesn't benefit the whole. And so we need something more than that.
Is there, when I hear you, there's a couple of things. One, I do want you to go over what the DARE model is, but it also begs the question, if allyship is not the right framing or the word, what would be?
So my favorite word is allegiance. Like I tell people, think about standing up in front of a flag and putting your right hand over your heart and saying, I pledge allyship to the flag. That sounds crazy, because you're like, when allegiance says, when it might be detrimental to me, I will still go and fight a war defending this country. There are people that make that pledge. And if a U.S. soldier stood up in front and said, I pledge allyship, I guarantee you when the orders come to go fight in the war, the answer is, I'll pass.
Mhm.
I'm not signing up for that. But allegiance says it's greater for the whole. And so when I benefit, I'm in the battle. And when it's possible that it may be to my detriment, I am still in the battle. And allegiance is what we need, not just for those that are in the minority group, but for all of us to benefit. And until we recognize that when we all benefit collectively, we all advance collectively, we will always have allyship.
Mhm. So what are some strategies that either prevent us from moving or advancing, or would help us move to the next level, move from allyship to allegiance?
So one of the things is asking where is it, and this sounds really that I need people to open their mind, but where is it, quote unquote, not my time? I remember they had an ESPN situation, and some of you may remember it, but they had two women reporters. Um, and one of them was a Black woman, and it was a potential promotion coming up. And there was another woman who was a white facing woman. And the white facing woman was caught on audio basically saying they're not going to promote her, meaning the Black woman, on my back. It's my time for promotion. And I know they have messed up. Now, get this. She was saying, I know that this company has not done their job in treating people equitably. I know that she's probably been looked over for promotions that she deserved. I know that she has been done wrong. I know that she's probably qualified for this position, but not when it's my turn.
Mhm.
Right?
Remember
And
that. I remember that.
you
Yeah.
remember that? And here's the got you. We sit back in judgment like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that. But honestly, ask yourself, what would you have said if it was your turn for a promotion?
Mhm.
Not because you were more qualified, but because it was just your time.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, just because the company feels some type of angst or they're getting pushback from other people, you now get to skip your turn just because. We all would likely sit back and say, I might have felt a little ways too.
Mhm.
But after you feel that little ways, what comes after that? Does it might be my turn in a time stance, but how many turns has she missed?
Mhm.
Yes, I have waited a long time, but what does it look like to right size this thing that has been wrong for millennials? What does that look like? And so it's being able to ask that second question after the initial emotion. Because here's the gotcha. I wish I could tell you, don't feel that way. It's so wrong to feel that way. I would be lying and would completely be denouncing what is human nature. Human nature is to look for our personal benefit.
Mhm.
But the real work happens when you ask the second question. Wait
Mhm.
a minute. In the scheme of what's right, yes, it's my turn in time, but in the scheme of what's right, is it actually my turn?
Mhm. It, so that permeates. That was a great example, but it also permeates in all the discussions of EEOC. They're getting a chance to get in, and when that took my place, the legal challenges that we're seeing before the Supreme Court that says, quotas don't work because that excludes me, or it's not fair. And so that same "is it my time" or "I've earned it" conversation seems to permeate all kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
How do we think about, okay, so we've got this idea of allyship, we've got this idea of allegiance, got it. How do we make the shift in terms of one, we've got those people who are out there still teaching the old way or the new way, the middle way, I guess it is, of DEI, where it's really about hear my story and my story will change you,
Mm-hmm.
or those kinds of things. But when it gets tough, when it gets to the point where, oh my goodness, I've got to put my neck on the line. So I'm sitting in a meeting, I see that, a person is being excluded, a woman, a person of color, someone from a different ethnic group is being excluded from the conversation. And I've got to step in and do it. I get some kind of feeling of, ooh, is it okay? Should I be
Mm-hmm.
doing it? Ooh, what does that look like? How do we either acknowledge or teach the courage to step up and to take this stance when I'm in harm's way, and not so much physically, but certainly being ostracized.
And the reality is sometimes it is a physical or fiscal harm's way, right? And that's what we're afraid of. We're afraid of that physical or that fiscal harm's way. And that's why allegiance matters, right? Allyship says when I'm in physical or fiscal's harm's way, that's when I tap out. The example I often use when I give the example of allegiance is the relationship between Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald and the freedom fighters, right? Many people don't know the very, very close relationship that Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe had, in that Marilyn Monroe pretty much got Ella Fitzgerald her big break. She went to the club owners out in California, LA, and said, hey, my girl needs to be on that stage. They did not have Black performers. Marilyn Monroe said, hey, if you let her perform on the stage, I will buy the front table. Now, here's the gotcha. Marilyn Monroe was like a Beyonce. Beyonce doesn't have to pay to do anything. If Beyonce comes to your club, you are so excited that she's coming because you know if Beyonce comes, the world is coming behind her. So your club is going to make a clear million that day. That was Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe said, not free, I'll buy a table, and everyone is coming because I come if you let her perform. And here's the gotcha. She has to be able to walk through the front door. Marilyn Monroe gained nothing, not a single solitary thing from her sacrifice. As a matter of fact, all she did was put her reputation on the line, because we knew what they called white people in that time that were affiliated with African Americans, or at the time we were called Negroes. There was only a negative benefit to her. She put herself physically on the line, and she put herself fiscally on the line to advance her allegiance of Ella Fitzgerald, and we see the outcome. The same is true for the freedom fighters. The freedom fighters, some of them that were white, Black ones too, but the white ones literally died, were killed, suffered horrible deaths. And here's the got you. They went into that knowing it. They went into that knowing that there's a possibility that I will die. And it's a very high possibility. It's not just possible, it's kind of likely that I'll die. There's a higher likelihood, almost 100% likelihood, that I will be physically harmed. I will put myself in physical danger to further this cause. And there's also a 100% likelihood that not only I, but my family will be physically harmed. Some of them such that their families disowned them and made them change their names, their last names, in order to be a part of the movement, right? That's what it looks like. It looks like, am I willing to put myself in the line? So in that situation that you described, I'm in this boardroom, this isn't right. If I say something, I might be ostracized, isolated, all of those things. Am I willing to put myself on the line and still do it anyway? That's when we have allegiance.
What are some strategies that you've employed or taught other individuals that can help create safe spaces for white allies or those who are white allegiance, to engage in conversations about race and equity without feeling defensive or attacked?
There aren't any. And that's the reality. I think one of the disservices we've done is that we've created this environment where everyone thinks there's always going to be a safe space. And oftentimes, safe spaces are where like-minded people collaborate, but not where change actually happens. Change happens in the unsafe spaces. And so if we really are going to have a change where we collaborate, where like-minded people who say, you know what, I'm ready to shift. I'm ready to evolve from being an ally to having allegiance. There has to be a safe space where we collaborate and we talk about what the actions need to be. But the change doesn't happen in the safe spaces.
So then what strategies can either we as partners in this our white allies or those who have allegiance to us, how do we engage and mobilize other individuals to join? Because we're going into a time, and unfortunately, there's a lot of concern, a lot of discussion that the hate speech and action is going to increase as we move closer and closer to the election.
Mm-hmm.
How can we, and in listening to you, it's like we went through this multiple times through our history where freedom fighters, white people, we all came together to fight, and then somehow it disbanded. We weren't able to hold on to that allegiance that carried us to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
So what strategies, what do we need to start doing? How can we not repeat the same things over and over again?
We have to, and this is the part where those people who are allies have to ask themselves, what am I an ally of, right? Because there has to be a critical mass on the side of people who can truly change the majority.
Mm-hmm.
What we have, the reason it always falls apart is because we don't have a critical mass. When you look at the freedom fighters, we could count on literally 2 hands the number of white people that were willing to join the freedom fighters. When we look at people who, during the women's suffrage movement, who said, wait a minute, we can't leave our Black sisters behind, who put themselves on the line, not only in the global community, but in the Black community, who said, wait a minute, what are y'all doing? We still have our own fight. We as people don't have the right to vote. And you're going to go over here and help these people who may not have the right to vote, but their husbands are going to cover them and make sure that they and their families are protected. Are you kidding me? When that happened, Black women had a critical mass who said, wait a minute, if we can work to get these women the right to vote, they'll support us. They didn't. What happens on the other side is that there's often not a critical mass. There's a few who say, you know what, let's step in and do this. But the critical mass is saying, we are not up for this. There has to start to be a critical mass that says, wait a minute, we have to do more than just lip service. We have to put ourselves on the line for this. And until there's a critical mass, we will always be in allyship.
Well, talk about your DARE model and your DARE communication. Give us some tools that will help us have these conversations and begin to engage and hopefully create that critical mass.
Absolutely. So my DARE model is, I love it. That's one of the 4 TED Talks you talked about. That was one I talked about. And the title of the talk was called Race, Religion, and Politics, the things we should be talking about at work. Mm-hmm. As a very proud Christian woman, I would always think it very interesting that people would say, well, you can't talk about religion at work. You can't talk about race. You can't talk about politics. And I would stop and say, okay, those are 3 things that are probably at the core of who I am. Mm-hmm. And so what you're telling me is I can't talk about me at work. Mm-hmm. How is that possible? Is that I can't talk about me. And so as I began to explore it, and I have a degree in conflict management, so I do mediations with the court system, teach alternative dispute resolution, teach conflict management, I realized it wasn't that we couldn't talk about it as in we shouldn't, laws prohibited us from doing so. It was that we didn't know how to talk about it. We do not have the conversational competence to have a dialogue with someone with whom we disagree, right? We're not taught that. So what we're taught instead is it's impolite. Let's avoid those conversations that have the potential to highlight our incompetence. Mm-hmm. Let's avoid those conversations that have the potential to show that I am afraid and I am ignorant. And what I said was, you know what, as a professor, here's what I know for a fact. The easier you make something, the higher the likelihood that people will actually engage in and do that thing. So Absolutely. Like when we think about the hypotenuse of a right triangle, you're like, not doing that. That's scary. I don't want to look stupid because first of all, hypotenuse, what is that? But now when I give you the Pythagorean theorem and says the formula for finding the hypotenuse of a right triangle is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, your likelihood of attempting a problem that includes the hypotenuse of a right triangle goes up because you have a formula that increases your likelihood of success.
Right.
So I did the same thing for conversational competence. What formula can I create for people that gives them a higher likelihood of navigating this conversation well? And that's how I came up with the DARE model. And DARE simply stands for describe, acknowledge, review, and engage. Describe versus interpret. So when we're in that space, don't jump to interpretation, stay in description. Acknowledge similarities without minimizing differences. Don't say, I don't see color, because when you don't see color, you can't offer your privilege in a place where I might not have any, and vice versa. Review the narratives that we have accepted as fact. One example I used already is, when did women get the right to vote? Those narratives can be very difficult because we're taught them. We are taught them from schools, education, the Google, but what's even harder is we're taught them in our homes. It's, what did your grandma teach you about those people or people like them, or even people like us? That's a narrative you have accepted as fact that actually may not be factual. And then the last one is engage for conversation and not conversion. Engage so that we understand, but I'm not trying to make you believe what I believe.
How would that, I can see that happening maybe at work because it's a little bit more controlled. But I think these conversions, or at least helping people get to the point where they can even be an ally. So if I think about it, I have to be an ally before I can be in allegiance with it, right? Because thinking that I would put my life on the line is a little bit on the difficult side. But I could probably stand up in non-threatening situations and say something. I can get better at doing that. How does one practice or think about engaging at Thanksgiving dinner when, you know, there's a little less likelihood that unless that I'm leaving my family, what am I doing? How does this work?
So it really is starting the conversation small. I think when we think about this stuff, we see what all needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And we think, I have to jump in the deep end. Instead of, we think of it as an Olympic-sized swimming pool as opposed to an ocean. When I think of swimming, I think you got to jump in, get on the high dive, jump in. But when you think about the beach, you kind of walk in. You walk in where it's safe, and you go further and further and further and further to your comfort level, and then you get more comfortable, right? I grew up in Miami, Florida. And I remember my mother made me go take swimming lessons because I swore I could swim and I almost drowned 3 times. And she was like, well, if this crazy girl has not learned that she can't swim, I got to teach her how to swim, right? And so that's how I learned. But everyone in my family knew how to swim. And I was the youngest. So I was like, if they know, surely I must know, we're all related. But I would walk and walk and walk to my comfort level. And then all of a sudden realize, okay, I need to go back and learn a skill to become more comfortable as I go deeper. Now, when I first started swimming, I could go a little further. Then I realized, hey, I like to go on a boat with my uncles deep sea fishing and just jump out into the water. Okay, got to go back and learn a new skill for that, because that's not just swimming the whole time. That's treading water. And my body mass wasn't such that I float easily. So I need to learn how to tread water well. So you start off slowly. Hey, where is my family on this?
Mm-hmm.
What conversations are they ready to have? What can I actually change and affect? And using the Kenny Rogers philosophy: know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. Sometimes every person isn't your battle. You're planting seeds, not changing minds, right? And so being able to navigate that in your own family.
Planting seeds. So the goal really is with DARE, how do I plant more and more seeds that bear fruit?
Right. And then how do I follow that up? It's the same. I tell people, as a Christian, I don't get, like, how do you have friends that are atheists? How do you have friends that are Muslim? How do you have friends that are Hindu? Because I'm not trying to convert them. We easily have conversations about our beliefs and our religion, but I'm planting seeds. So I do have friends that over time started out as atheists and now they have converted, but that was not my intention. My intention was for us to have a conversation and an appreciation of what the other person believed and brought to the table.
You know, it's interesting when I hear you say this, and I want to kind of pause a little bit and ask others, if you've got questions, please raise your hand or put it in the chat so that we know, to get you involved in this conversation. But to me, it sounds like you are actually saying that I need to do more work on me, because in most conversations with people, we listen to rebut, not listen to understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so if that's true, that for me to move to allegiance without so much as the danger, or at least kind of like you said, in the water, trading into the water, then I really have to be really clear on my skills as someone who can hold a conversation on a difficult conversation.
Absolutely. And this is particularly for the work on ourselves is particularly for those people who want to go from allyship to allegiance, right? And let me tell you why, because remember the analogy I gave of being at the beach and walking and walking and walking. What we often do is we walk to our level of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to truly have allegiance, we need to walk to our level of skill and then go and get more skilled and come back. Because remember, I said, hey, I got here and realized I need to learn how to swim. Go learn how to swim. Hey, I got here and realized I need to learn how to tread water. I didn't stop at swimming because where I needed and wanted to go required a different skill level. So we get to where we're skilled and go and learn a different skill. We don't go to our level of incompetence and drown there. We go and get more skill to further the cause and bring people along.
Got it. Susan, do we have other questions, or does anyone have a question or a comment? Join the conversation.
I think we have a lot of comments about really appreciating what Deetra is saying, that talks about how she's planting seeds, that DARE model for engaging in a very respectful way, allowing somebody else to hold a different opinion, but allowing there to be an openness to discuss what those differences are from the viewpoint that we both hold, respecting the other's identity as an individual, not trying to convert. And that truly aligns with everything I see about this. Mm-hmm. It's that powerful conversation about what's different while recognizing what's similar. Mm-hmm. When we can do that, we truly can create the stepping stones to building to the future. So there were a lot of great comments in that we could be reading it, but I think it's pretty straightforward that she's just been doing a beautiful job of laying out how we take what many people don't want to talk about and make it a beautiful conversation about why we should be talking about it. Linda, I see you have your hand up.
The one thing I think about is, question that I'm often asked by men, because, we're part of the Lead Hership global community. And a lot of men have reached out to me saying, gosh, I love your programming. I love what you're doing, but I don't know if I'm welcome. I don't know if I'm allowed to even come. And, I wonder if there's room for allies, right, to what you're doing. And I'm like, heck yes, we want as much support and we want as much inclusivity as we can generate. We want a safe space for women to feel honored and valued, and we want a place where they can be very vulnerable and transparent and talk about real issues. But we do also believe in the idea of sponsorship and allyship, which, you've sort of broken the mold on even what that means. So thank you for that. But in my mind, how do we begin communicating to others that we're really open to and want to engage in conversations around sponsorship, mentorship, allyship, or as you said, allegiance? How do we begin the conversation of saying, yes, you are welcome, and I do need support and help, and I'm looking for the kind of unique advantages that someone in your position with your privilege can offer me?
One is and this is a perfect example of how we begin to shift the conversation from allyship to allegiance, because I actually have a list of questions an ally would ask. They would ask a question like that. How I feel like I don't belong over there. Am I welcome? I love what you're doing. Am I welcome? And being able to say, tell me what makes you feel like you don't belong over here. And when they say things like, well, it's all women, what do you think we're learning? Why do you think this space had to be created? This space had to be created because we didn't belong over there. How you could really serve us well is making sure that space is safe for us while making sure that this space is still funded.
Oh, I love that. Holy
Right?
cow. Beautiful, Deetra.
But when we make that shift from allyship, because a person that has allegiance is not just thinking about why don't I belong over there? They're thinking about why did that space have to be created in the first place? And until I've made it safe over here, I'm going to financially make sure that it's still safe over there. Right? That's how that shift, when we make that shift, that's how we begin to think.
Yeah. Susan, you got your hand up.
One of the things it's funny when you mentioned Maryland, I had just listened to another podcast recently that also pointed out that same story. The additional fact that was mentioned there was that Maryland said, I will not be on the stage with Ella, because she wanted Ella to stand in her own power and strength and beauty and not have it be that it was because Maryland accepted her. And that's exactly what you're describing. It's to be there in support of them, but let them shine in their own beauty and grace and brilliance, and make it known that you believe in them, not because they're hooked arms with you, but because they can stand on their own.
Right. And it's not just, I remember very recently I spoke at an event, and it was amazingly an older white gentleman came to me afterwards and he said, I owe you an apology. And I said, okay, I accept your apology, but I have no clue why, because we've never talked before. I don't even know your name, sir. I would love an introduction. He gave me his name. He said, because prior to you coming, they told me who the speaker was. I looked you up. He was on the board of this event because my speaker fee is pretty nice. I get paid very well to speak. And he said, I was very adamant. You all just brought her in because she's a Black woman. And the board had talked about we hadn't had any minority speakers, blah, 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 blah. We need to diversify the stage, all these great things. And he said, I was very adamant. The only reason they were bringing you in was because you were a Black speaker. And it surely did help us that you were a Black woman. And he came to me, he said, I didn't say that to you. I said it, but I want to apologize to you because you are one of the best speakers I've ever heard in my entire life. And I said, did it cross your mind ever that I was picked because I was a Black woman, but I was a Black woman that was better than any person you've ever heard before? And he said, it never crossed my mind, but from now on it will. I said, because two things can be true. You can need to diversify the stage, and that diversity can happen in excellence, even superior excellence. And he said, absolutely. My mind is now changed, and I hope you accept my apology. And I will now be fighting for us to diversify the stage. And I said, it doesn't just look like Black women. It looks like older white men because we want to youngify the stage. It looks like people from the LGBTQIA plus community. It looks like people from the differently able community. It looks like neurodiversity. And so one of the things we have to begin to really change our framework is because when we say DEI, especially with a US lens, we think about it as Black, white, woman, man. And I get to go around the world having these conversations, Like I was in Ghana last October. I in Tanzania, in Kenya, I'll be in Mozambique. The majority of the people there are Black. They're not having the same DEI conversation that we're having. I would work with a client in Thailand. They're not having the same DEI conversation that we're having, right? But there's still DEI. And so when we have to look at it, we have to begin to look at it from this global lens, and it's not just Black, white, woman, man.
I've got a question because I deal in the leadership development space, and oftentimes I'm working with Black or women-owned businesses in terms of what I'm doing. And it's always interesting that when we talk about DEI, that we don't really have a way of talking about it with people who were born in America who still hold reasons why, well, they're not going to help me. They're not going to open the door. They're not going to ally me. They're not going to be an ally. They're not going to be an allegiance. I don't want them in here. I don't want, on religion or whatever it is. How do we shift the conversation to be more inclusive around everybody owns a piece of changing our minds, of understanding that?
Absolutely. We begin to have that conversation with education and evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's often shifting. It's often difficult to shift in minority communities because there's overwhelming evidence that others can't be trusted. And there's limited evidence that people are going to be on my side, right? And so there's always reconfirming things. And so when we begin to have a shift in the evidence, that's when you'll see a lot of shift in the mindset. But we have to begin to have the conversation of what does openness for a shift look like? Because the evidence is just not there. Let's be clear. It's just not there that this is going to work in my favor. It's just not there. I was doing a report, working with a reporter one day, doing some stuff for an article that went into a magazine. And when she talked to me, she was like, I am so mad that I spoke to you because now I have to rewrite this whole article. Right? Because she was talking about supporting women in business. And I said, here's the gotcha. When you talk about supporting women in business, that has to be segmented because what the data shows, and I'm a professor, so I talk very, it's easy. I want to make sure I speak in a way that everybody can grasp it, but I think like a professor. I think in data, I think in numbers. And what I said is the data shows us that the Black population, business owners population, particularly Black women, are when they talk about assistance, they assist with education, right? When they assist other communities, they assist with dollars. So you find all these incubators for Black women that are about, let me teach you, let me show you, let me guide you. When you find incubators for others, they're saying, let me give you access. Let me give you access to capital, access to partnerships, access to banks, access to being bought out, right? And when the evidence begins to shift, i.e. the data, because many of them know it anecdotally, they know I don't feel like I'm supported. But if they actually start to go down that feeling, the data supports that you're not being supported. And so what they have to begin to do is be open. What does it look to be open to receive this information, be open to the change, be open to those people who really are interested, invested in me being successful. And then on the other side, the evidence has to support that this openness is warranted.
Okay, got it. Do we have any other questions before we close out? Or comments?
We do not have any other questions, but I would love to hear David's comments because I love the fact that we actually have a white man who showed up to be part of this discussion. I love the fact that we do have a diverse group of people here. We are not all of one anything. We are all different.
Well, I'm really appreciative of finding the time to come here to listen to this today. I agree with everything that's been said. Everything that you've talked about is right. I work and have been working and supporting a village in Uganda for over 5 years. And we just pulled a collaboration together to take 5 different industries to them in a ministry stand to teach them how to do and provide self-sustainability for them and walk away. We're not selling anything, we're giving. But this foundation that I have up today is another C-suite network person. The founder of this is a blind lawyer named Daniel Hodges, and I sit on his board. And we focus on the DEI, the I portion more than anything else, in that inclusion for the handicapped doesn't matter what flavor they are. It's 26% of the entire population of the United States has some form of different ability, disability, if you like that term. I don't. And so, is there something that you can say that could help me understand why corporations are not paying enough attention for the less than mainstream population?
Because they don't have to, right? And that's really what it boils down to, why people haven't done it before. We look at especially in the US, the racial lens. When did companies really start caring? When their stores were burning, when George Floyd was murdered, and there was this public outcry. And that's when every company up and decided, you know what, we need to hire a chief diversity officer. So you mean Target being on fire somehow illuminated your mind that you hadn't done right all these decades? Right? It wasn't Target being on fire. It was that donors, it was that employees, it was that customers, it was that clients, it was people saying, if you don't do this, we will withhold our dollars. We will withhold your very sustenance if you don't do what's right by us. So it wasn't because it was socially right, even though they made these social statements as if they had this come to Jesus epiphany. It was what was fiscally right for the organizations. And so the same is true on your side. When you think about differently able people, it becomes a fiscal question. And that's why we have, when you think about the laws around ADA or things like that, it's around what is reasonable, the reasonable standard and a reasonable accommodation. And reasonable is a fiscal term. Can you do this without undue fiscal hardship? And oftentimes, organizations will make the case on a grander scale that we cannot make these adjustments without undue fiscal hardship. So let's say, for example, if you have a historical building that has to be outfitted now because it's an office, well, that will be an undue fiscal hardship to make it ADA compliant. So not worth it for us to do it, because the government says if it's an undue hardship, we don't have to do it. And so that's when we have to begin to tap into, okay, what are the benefits outside of this fiscal burden that you think you have? Even down to, I work with different organizations as we begin to navigate the remote work, or what I call it location independence, not work from home. We begin to talk about location independent work. Now, how do advocates of the differently able step into that as a mantra of, hey, you may not have to outfit your office and have this fiscal responsibility. We have differently able people who are able to work efficiently, effectively from anywhere in the world. And guess what? Their home is already outfitted. You can hire them and still get the benefit of their knowledge.
That is so powerful. That is just stunning. We have one last question, and I think it's Margaret. If you can, you raise your hand, a really quick question.
Hi, this is Margaret. I'm with National Organization on Disability, so I wanted to address that. A lot of companies do not want to interface or engage with the population because there is so much stigma that lies within our population. And it's really something they really should address because of the intersectionality that's involved. It's the one underrepresented group that crosses all boundaries. You can age into it. You can be born to it. A split second can change a person's life. So I understand, as Deidre mentioned, the bottom line is always something that companies are looking at, but there's a more intrinsic value to actually interfacing with people with disabilities.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.